Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to our next edition of our JOE morning presentation with our coffee and donuts. We're very happy to have Jason Smith, Superintendent of Batavia City Schools, with us today, and he's going to talk about one of his predecessors, John Kennedy, the namesake for John Kennedy School. So it's not John F. Kennedy, just John Kennedy. We're the only school named with, only city with a John Kennedy school that isn't named after the president, probably. So, and Jason used to be an intern way back when here, so he's got the historical research chops, and he's been very excited to share this topic with us. So we're very happy to have him, and take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that. Thank you all for being here this morning. Is this too loud, Paul? Or, is that all right? So, as Ryan said, I'm pleased to be here talking about my predecessor, John Kennedy, not to be confused with the president, John F. Kennedy. And as I talk to my colleagues around the state, I mentioned John Kennedy, and they always assume that they're talking about the president, John F. Kennedy. And as I get information from the state, and I see reports, and I have consultants come in, and they always say John F. Kennedy. One of the two things that kind of makes us, our collective skin crawl here in Batavia is when they talk about John F. Kennedy. Nothing against John F. Kennedy. He was before my time, but John Kennedy is now named after John F. Kennedy. And the second thing up there, you can see on there, I have Batavia City School District. Oftentimes we get mail, sometimes we can get applications that incorrectly say Batavia Central School, which kind of makes us like, it's not right. So I kind of put it up there with John F. Kennedy and John Kennedy, and then oftentimes we get referred to as Batavia Central because we're surrounded by all these central school districts, and that's a whole other topic, central school districts versus city school districts, but just a couple of quick comments there. So I've been the Batavia Superintendent since January of 2021, or 22 I think. Lost track now. What year are we in, 23? So I'm coming up on year number 2 this coming January. So I've been here almost 2 full years in January. Prior to that, many years ago, I taught history. I'm a history teacher by trade, as I like to say. I majored in history. So it's a good combination, and I also love to read. So it's a good combination of my love of history, my love of Batavia history, and also education and John Kennedy. I taught history for several years at Albion, was a principal at Elba, superintendent at Lindenville, and have been here since January of 21. So with that being said, that's who I am. There's our school logo up there. Notices it says Batavia City School District, not Batavia Central School District. Here is John Kennedy School, not John F. Kennedy School, John Kennedy School. Anybody know what year it was built? Paul's principal, 1956. There's a nice little sign inside the school. And I was going through some of our records in the district office. I found some of the old programs when the school was first dedicated. So it was built in 1956. It was all swampland there. As a kid growing up in Elm Street, I used to play in the woods over there. Now those woods are all gone. But John Kennedy was built on swampland in 1956. This actually is a newer part of the school that I'm showing here. But the school itself was built in 1956 to service the students on the north side. And there's John Kennedy. You notice the name John Kennedy Intermediate. When the school was consolidated back in 2011, we had Jackson Primary on the south side that serves kids in grades K through 1. We had John Kennedy Intermediate, which currently serves grades 2 through 4, and then of course we had the middle school and high school. So I'm glad the district kept the names John Kennedy. John Kennedy, of course, is a historic name, as is Robert Morris. Again, a separate presentation. So there's John Kennedy himself with our school logo there. So the book that I'm talking about, it's actually still in print. It's called, the book that John Kennedy wrote is called The Batavia System of Individual Instruction. So the key word in this title is individual instruction. The book was written in the early 20th century. And what's interesting, when I got this book off Amazon, you can still look in the back. I'll show you, I can't pass it around. You can see, remember the old library card days? You can actually see people that had checked it out.
Cool.
So that kind of cool. So it was checked out in 1940. That's the last time it was checked out. March 18, 1935, so there's the old library card stuff on there. And the book is still in print. I got it off Amazon. So who was John Kennedy? Real quick, I'm going to talk more about what he wrote about, less than about him. But he was born in England in 1846. He was one of 14 siblings. 9 of his siblings were also educators. He served in the Civil War as a teenager. In 1878, he ran a teacher's institute in Greene County. And then he was asked to come here by then the village of Batavia in 1890 to be superintendent. He served superintendent here for the next 23 years. And then he also, as an aside, was an advocate of the Holland Land Office here, and also wrote a biography about Robert Morris, which of course is our school on the north side, named after Robert Morris. He was an advocate in making sure that Robert Morris's legacy still lives on. So he also wrote more books. He wrote a book called What Words Say, that's about spelling, how to teach kids how to spell. He wrote a book called The Step Dictionary, Greek Must Go, and then the most famous one, the Batavia System of Individual Instruction. What's interesting, I like to read a lot. I don't read a lot of old books. I did when I was in college. I was kind of just a bit intimidated by some of the language in here, but it was a quite accessible book. What's unique though, and I'm going to use some words that we no longer use in education, the words you use to describe student are words that we no longer use, but that those are the words that were common back then. So I think you'll have some fun hearing some of those words that were used there. If we were to use these words now, we'd all be fired. If we were to use these words now, we'd be fired. So in the very beginning, he has a quote from a 13-year-old boy. And remember one of those words I said we use to be fired, one of those words is the word dull. He talks about dull boys that don't learn as quickly as the rest of us possibly. So he was asked, this 13-year-old child was asked, are there really any dull boys? One little fellow, not more than 13 years old, said this: there are not any dull boys. This has been proved at Batavia, New York, where a system of individual instruction has been adopted, which has attracted people from all parts of the world. This system shows that all children can learn if they only have a chance. So John Kennedy, in my opinion, was really ahead of his time. He was really ahead of his time there, in the sense that he believed that all students can really learn if they're given the opportunity. So here's essentially what it is. John Kennedy writes about in his book, one, having high expectations. That concept is still around today. It was not around back then. But the concept back then was, we're going to have a room full of 60 students, and I'm going to teach to the best of my ability. If you learn, so be it. If not, you're on your own. So this concept he had back then, back then we had 60 students in a room, only one teacher. That's an important part of this concept he talks about here. So he talks about, throughout the book, having high expectations. He talks about letting students find out for themselves how they can learn, with less teacher direction and more student involvement. Again, that has not changed much in our world now. Again, a word that we no longer use, the backward student. Okay, he believes that this system can assist all students, both the brightest students and those who are considered to be backward. You know, we now have different terminology for students that have different learning needs. Backward is not one of them, but that's what they was used back then. He believes it has more efficiency for the classroom teacher, and he says her all the time. It makes her more efficient. At that time, there were not a lot of male teachers, so every time he references the teacher in the book, it's always a she. Always a she. And the first teacher that used this system was a woman named Lucy Hamilton. We'll talk about her later, but all the time it's she. And then he talks about having more instruction and to stop teaching to the masses. And then he says that's a tough word, it is not our knowledge prevailing in later years, but the process through which we have knowledge and how that was learned. So I just want to read through a couple parts of that and what he talks about still in the introduction. This is, What's interesting too about this book is not everything here is written by him. He has other pieces in here from other superintendents that came and saw the school as well. So some of these are observations of the system itself, from outsiders, and some are John Kennedy's words himself. So this is an outsider's perspective. It is, to my mind, the strongest feature of the Batavia system is that it preserves and encourages and stimulates the joy of accomplishments. This is an important part too. The child is never told by his teacher. He is shown to find out for himself and how to enjoy finding out for himself. The leisure for the work gives the teacher the opportunity to discover where the boy's thinking machine is bogged down, to remove the obstacle and set it going again. It is not the answer to the arithmetic problem the teacher wants. Heather, I think you'll appreciate this next line. Heather's the assistant principal at John Kennedy. It is the ability and the perseverance of the boy to get the answer. What do we call that now, John Kennedy? Grit. Yeah. So he's talking about something we talk about now. John Kennedy over the last couple of years has adopted the concept that we need to have students push and push and push. We call that now having grit. That's what he's talking about here. The ability and perseverance of the boy to get the answer. Another current trend now is the importance of mental health. This is rather a serious note here. John Kennedy believes that this system will help with the mental health needs of students back then. There's a very sad story that's still in the introduction here. And it's really quite sad. It's a story of a 14-year-old boy in Morris, Illinois, who committed suicide in 1898. And listen to the reason why he left. He shot himself, he says. He said, this is a suicide note. Friends, I shot myself because a teacher would not let me alone. I worked 6 examples on the board, and I asked her if they were right, spelled W-R-I-T-E, and she said, you may go to your seat and have a failure for bothering me. And after I went to my seat, she had my name on the board, a big 0 after it, and then they laughed at me. If I can't be marked for what work I can go to heaven, then the Lord won't treat me either. Dear Mother, I love you and Clara and Eliza. Do not weep over me, but tell Cap if he comes back, I will say goodbye to him. This is all I have to say. So this child was humiliated because the teacher humiliated him. And John Kennedy believes that obviously that didn't have to happen, right? And had that student been given more support, as he talks about with the individual instruction, perhaps that child would not have been so humiliated. And I just thought that was such a powerful thing to have in there in his book. And again, we talk about mental health now all the time in schools, as we should, but even in 1898, we had a student who had committed suicide because the teacher humiliated him in front of his friends. That's the most heavy part of this whole presentation. All right, so John Kennedy, when he came here, he saw an opportunity for a great rescue. He saw overcrowded classrooms, he saw students who were frustrated, and he saw teachers who were frustrated. And of course, even back then, they had concerns about economics and the school budget. Again, his second point there, again, the word we no longer use, find the most backward and make him the most forward. So take the student who has the most challenging times and work with him, and that brings up the rest of the class. Later on in the book, he calls those students the laggard, L-A-G-G-A-R-D, a word we no longer use, how to assist the laggards. Talking about the overcrowded classroom, 60 in a room. So jumping out to 2023, some buzzwords that we use now, ways that we help kids. So back then, John Kennedy was doing what we're trying to do now. And the systems that we have in place now, we have acronyms for them. MTSS, it's a way to support students, it's a multi-system support. And also RTI, how we assist those students who are not coming up to speed, giving those students individual instruction. Also, he talks about the 3 don'ts. In the system, he talks about the 3 don'ts. And these are the 3 don'ts. Don't tell, don't do individual work. And here's what they say about the origin. The superintendent thought he saw an opportunity for a great rescue. He had seen grades breaking down, had seen children and teachers collapsing under the strain of wholesale teaching. He therefore advised the board to leave all the children in that room and to send the new teacher in there to do the individual work exclusively. So he wanted to have one group of students who were struggling, the dull students, the backward students. They would work with the extra teacher. He also talks about having students become more independent. He wants students to become more self-confident, to become more self-reliant, and also to take initiative. Again, we talk about the word having encouragement and grit. The greater the struggle, the greater the triumph. It's like running a race, you know. Nobody ever wishes they didn't exercise, but after you're done, you're pretty happy you did. Right? So the greater the struggle, the greater the triumph. From John Kennedy's perspective, he sees the role of the superintendent, again, his words, to be eyes for his laboring teachers and inspiration to their faithful hearts. And then this, according to him, this will give him more time to function on the high function of the office, kind of having a landscape of the whole operation instead of worrying about every single little detail. A couple more quotes I want to read to you. This I found to be very exciting. It is the slow child who opens the teacher's eyes when she once assumes that he is not, again, a hopeless blockhead. Hopeless blockhead. And the sympathetic teacher learns to thank the momentary unresponsiveness of the child. Where does she see her greatest triumphs? Where does she find her highest gratifications? Where does she recognize the causes of her ripened wisdom and science? In the children who were once slow, in the children who once saw her meditating. The greater the struggle, the more obstinate the obstacle, the greater the triumph. Many years ago, I had a student, and his name was Ryan. He was what he would call back then a backward student. The student had special needs. And he was sitting in the corner of my room on the right-hand side. I was teaching World War II, I think. And he never participated in any other classes except mine. And he always had an aide with him. So I would, when he would participate, that to me was more exciting to me to have him raise his hand and participate than the more engaged students. So I think, as a school, we did something, I did something to help him be engaged. But I always find as an educator, as John Kennedy did, I know as Paul and Heather do as well, it's those students that give us the most. All students are important, obviously, but the ones that we find to be the most challenging oftentimes make us feel the most encouraged. As John Kennedy says, the hopeless blockhead. Right? We would never call a student that now, but he's saying there that it's those students that give us the most excitement as educators because of the challenges that they give us. So Lucy Hamilton was the first teacher to use this system. And in November of 1898, she had 69 students in one room. Just think about that for a minute, 69 in one classroom. No way she could be effective. Certainly no way we could be effective now, but that at that time was common understanding. The teacher's health was failing. So again, Professor Kennedy offered her his 3 don'ts. First, don't tell a child anything but see that he knows it. Second, don't do anything for a child but see that it is done. And third, don't do anything upon a lesson that has not been recited. So, and then Anna Stein, another teacher in the system, her students with the system of having students work with a kid one-on-one. So you would have the overall instruction with the 69 students in the room, and then those students who were the blockheads would be set aside, and another teacher would then work with them on their own, as opposed to just learning everything all at once and hoping for the best. So again, the goal there is to bring up those students who were struggling, give them more support, give them more instruction. Here's a perspective from another superintendent. His name was Barney Whitney from Augsburg. We talk about data all the time. We talk about data back then. So he observed there was a big improvement in the readings exams, over 50% improvement. There was less discipline problems. There was he calls it the entire absence of unrest and inattention. Again, finding those weak students and making them the strong spots. And again, the word dull. We searched for the slow and dull, but failed to find one. So this was really a revolutionary idea to give students more support as opposed to teaching out and looking for the best. And these methods will revolutionize the schools of England. So he had visitors from England, from Canada, from across the U.S. We'll talk about them more later. But this concept, again, back when we were in school, and some of you here, you have 30, 40, 55, 60 kids in a classroom, right? I'm sure some of you can recall, maybe not that large, but 69 students in one room in 1898. The teacher was obviously very frustrated. John Kennedy saw a way to improve that. And then he had visitors from Indiana, Wisconsin, Canada, Minnesota, Michigan, and Philadelphia. So across the country, people came here to see this system. Here's another interesting section, another modern day problem issue we have now. It's happening right now across the U.S. and it happened back then. Again, his words, not mine. Children of foreign parents. Now we have better words than foreign, but back then, children of foreign parents. So people came from Michigan to deal with these children of immigrants, right? So they observed how we were going to address the children of foreign parents, children of what we now call immigrants. The observations there, the students had a relish for the lesson. Every child was confident, and they were no longer timid. And this is a quote from the book. There was a tonic, like the ocean breeze, in seeing child after child gain individual power in reading, writing, spelling, use of English, music, and drawing. So this says there's a whole chapter in the book on dealing with children of foreign parents, right? We have the challenge now. We have ESL programs across the state. My daughter's an ESL teacher. How are we going to help students learn English and adapt to the system here? So even back then, it was a concern. All right. Did anybody know the story of Sisyphus? What's the story of Sisyphus?
Pushing the rock up the hill.
Pushing the rock up the hill. And what happens?
Comes back down again.
Then he pushes it back up again.
Yeah.
And he keeps going on and on and on, making no progress. John Kennedy talks about, there's Sisyphus there in the right, pushing the rock up the hill, the rock comes back down, push the rock back up the hill, rock comes back down. He does this all day long. John Kennedy makes the analogy to those students who he calls the laggard student. All right, it's an exercise in futility. They could be ignored. The laggards could be ignored when school was voluntary. When school was made an expectation, part of the law, no longer could we ignore the laggards, the dull students, the backward students, as John Kennedy says them. Talks about them. We talked about Sisyphus, and again, John Kennedy believes that the strong teaching will budge the laggard. Then he has a quote from the Bible in here that some of you may recognize, that he talks about in this book here as well. And he talks about, find the page here. So there's a famous quote from the Bible: "The stone which the builders have rejected has become the headstone of the corner." And then John Kennedy has that quote in there. He says, "I believe in the laggard, and I like that teacher who believes in the laggard. I like that teacher who expects to get every one of her pupils through her grade. And if she expects to do so, she will do so." And then he talks about, again, another quote that I liked from the book about the laggard. On the other hand, the unorganized school lets the laggards escape. And it discouraged all the rest of the children by giving them the task of Sisyphus, rolling the same old stone up the same old hill, never finding it back at the bottom again. The unorganized school was weighed in the balance and was found wanting. It has been retired. I am glad to say that it has passed. It has been passed into history, not with many claims to respect, but it will never return. It should never return. So that's how he addresses the laggard. So John Kennedy, we're alive in 2020, in 2023. I've listed some of the current trends now, the current initiatives happening across the state. Mental health, there's all kinds of grants at the school, that schools have received, including ours, to support mental health. Think of the student in 1898 that shot himself because of the way the teacher made him feel. John Kennedy talks about all the time high expectations for all. Back then it was a big deal because when school was not made an expectation, those laggards kids, they could be ignored. He talks about rigorous instruction, high quality instruction, even back then. He talks about having the child be at the center of the instruction. Not the teacher, not us, but the child. He talks about giving the students more control. The way that many schools, including ours, now evaluate teachers is what we see the students doing. What the teacher has done to let that student be successful. Not what I've done, not what I've done, but what has the student done. How have I created the atmosphere for that student to be successful? And what am I observing? As observers, when we go in and watch observe a teacher, usually the last thing we want to see is a teacher doing what I'm doing, up on the stage talking the whole time, right? We want to see the students engaged. We don't always want to see the teacher up front. That's what John Kennedy talks about. Not this, what I call the library talk. When we see the library talk, it's usually not that effective. We want to see students engaged. John Kennedy wants to see more of that. He talks about accountability for all, even the laggard. All students need to be held to high expectations. And then just some more research. I don't get this too heavy into research, but two of the researchers that I follow a lot, Robert Marzano, he's a present day educational researcher, and Marzano talks about high quality instruction. And then Charlotte Danielson talks about how we observe and evaluate teachers. So I made some ties there to the present day. So if John Kennedy were to meet, imagine a conversation, this would be more exciting for Paul and Heather, but imagine a conversation between John Kennedy and current day research, what they could be talking about. They'd be using different words. They wouldn't be using the word dull or laggard anymore. But Robert Marzano would talk about the importance of homework and practice. John Kennedy talked about the importance of having kids do meaningful homework and practice in the classroom. He talks about how to give students feedback, how they're learning, what they're doing well, what they can improve. That's a key theme in the book. He talks about asking kids questions, and asking kids thoughtful questions. Not so much like, what year was the Civil War, but possibly, how could the Civil War have been stopped? What if the Civil War never happened? More thoughtful, engaging questions rather than those basic low-level questions. And then Charlotte Danielson, in her model, talks about students being the center of instruction. Not so much myself, the teacher, the student. And then this is a common trait too. Of course, we love all of our teachers, they all do a great job. But a common mistake, especially in newer teachers, I found, and Paul and Heather, I'm sure would agree, is that newer teachers tend to either help too little, which is not good, or they tend to help too much, which is not good either. Okay, so John Kennedy tries to find a middle ground there and having teachers have a balanced instruction, helping just enough. Not too much, not too little. That's what John Kennedy has a whole section there about teachers helping too much versus not helping enough. And then there's some research that was done in Canada. Canada came down to see this system, and this was their observations. They believe that the JK system is effective because, one, it keeps kids in school. That wasn't happening. It keeps kids in school. Think about why it keeps kids in school. Because they're engaged and they're being successful. There was improvement in reading exams. Back then, reading exams were still around. There was improvement in the reading exams. It addresses the discipline by getting rid of the usual cause of restlessness. Usually what happens in classroom when a student is bored, that's when they tend to have discipline issues. So this addresses that by making sure students, one, are not bored, and then two, they're engaged in the learning process. And not being frustrated to the point of ending their own life. Spirit of earnestness and self-interest. He produced independent and self-reliant learners, and again, gives support to the slow and unresponsive pupil. This all goes back to having an overcrowded classroom of like 69 students, and then finding ways to address those students who are not meeting expectations. My final thought, and I'll leave some time for questions. I have a picture there of a crown. I just love this quote from the book. My final thoughts on John Kennedy: one, he was a man way ahead of his time. The something he's talking about here was unheard of back then. He was a true visionary. He had high expectations. And then he talks about kings. I just love this. I may even use it opening day with our staff. He says this. This is how I'm going to end. You know, there is a saying that he who can is a king. The children of Batavia can. They have power and they can do things. They are kings of their work. They attack difficulties without shrinking, and they master things usually. In the case they are not able to master difficulty, there is somebody ready to point their way to mastery. The individual teacher is a leader rather than a helper. She has traveled the road and knows the way. She says to her students, "This way, follow me." The pupil does the climbing himself, but there's no boosting by the teacher. The teacher works with the pupil, not for him. She encourages him by telling him that the difficulties he is meeting are such as all who have traveled the road of knowledge they have met and mastered. The children of Batavia are kings. They are kings of their work. So is that a great way to end it? They are kings of their work. So at that, happy to take any questions on the book. I read the whole thing. I have it all marked up, and happy to hear your thoughts and questions. Bill?
The kids that they called laggards, when I went to school, they were called special class.
Right.
Is that a different?
We still have special education.
You do have that?
Yeah. We have kids. That's really the last place where we want to put a child.
Yeah.
We try to keep them in the general classroom as long as possible now, as we should. We have students who have special learning needs, that are put in self-contained classrooms. Now we call them 12-1-1, 12 students to one teacher to like 1-8, 6-1-1. The less kids in those classes, usually the more severe their learning concerns are.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then sometimes we send kids out to special programs at both cities. We have kids that come here as well for the programs we offer here at Batavia too. So it all depends on what the child needs, and all that's run out to like special ed. Back then, special ed was not a thing. It didn't come around to the 60s, I think, with some of it, with President Johnson. I think that's when it all started. So.
I just want you to know that I matriculated from a Quonset hut on East Main Street for the first year to John Kennedy School.
You what, sorry?
There was a Quonset hut at Old East Main School.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the third grades were. And
East Main School, yeah.
So we went over to the new John Kennedy in 1956. It feels like 1856. But I have to say, too, that the formative years for myself were in third grade and fifth grade. And I had teachers who really inspired me to want to learn. They also taught me critical thinking at that stage.
Right.
And that's why I developed a greater interest in history as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Good, thanks. Bill?
Do the kids at John Kennedy still sing the school song?
Yes, we do.
I sang when I was there. I
They
still
say
know.
our school
I
at
still
John
know.
Kennedy or
I was
Blue.
Yeah.
You know who wrote the song, Bill? Do you know who?
Zena Muller, I believe, right?
I thought it was Lionel Hamilton.
Oh, did he? Okay, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, Hamilton.
I remember Miss Muller, the principal. I
Yeah,
didn't
Zena
know the
Muller.
singer.
Her name's on that plaque, I think.
Okay, good.
Yes, so they,
too.
We're still going to give our best with youthful zest.
Yeah.
I know the song. Yeah, we're still going to sing it.
The other question I have is, you say Batavia are city schools, not central schools. When I went to school, it was called a central school because there were other schools.
Here? You went to school?
No, I went to Central New York.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm thinking, we're central, but I guess there are one-room schoolhouses in another place.
Right.
And another school which had all 12 grades, but they weren't central. This was the central. So my question is, who's the central school for
So,
Batavia?
that's all, right, so there is no central school, so the way, like, we have Elba Central School, where I used to work, Oakfield Central School, Lindenville Central School. Back then, as you mentioned too, we had all these individual schoolhouses all over the place. I worked in Lindenville, we had a school in Knowlesville, and they were truly neighborhood schools. So sometime, I think in the 40s or 50s, there was a concept to centralize. So all those little schoolhouses, there's a schoolhouse in, I actually drive by my way to work in Lindenville, and Knowlesville. That serviced all the Knowlesville students. When they centralized, they all went to the campus, say in Lindenville or Elba. Elba used to have these one-room schoolhouses too. When they centralized, they all came to the Elba Central School, which is of course on Main Street in Elba. So that's how the concept of central comes from. So there is no Batavia Central School because we have one, we're a city, and then two, although like I'm thinking of some of the bigger districts like in Erie County, Akron Central School, West Seneca, it's these larger districts, they have these smaller schools, they all centralized. The other thing that's kind of confusing too, to talk about school names, is there's some schools called the so-and-so Union Free School District. Have you heard of that phrase, Union Free? Sometimes we think it means that they're free of the union, but there is a teachers union there. All schools have teachers. They're not free of that union. They are free of the union that when schools were centralized, they were not part of that process. So they were free of that union of all the schools. Not the teachers union. They have teachers unions there, but they're free of that union. I can't think of any examples right now, but there's a few.
Or Erie County, like Kenmore.
Union free.
Is union free.
Yeah. So they were, back then, they were free of that union.
East Rochester.
East Rochester Union free.
What's the biggest challenge you face today?
Same thing John Kenny talked about, trying to address those students who have learning needs and working with all our students. They talked about here, I'll go back a bit. One of the phrases we use all the time is MTSS, multi-tier system of support, how we can support our students in mental health needs. That is a huge concern now. And the RTI stands for Response to Intervention, how we respond to those students who have learning needs. And what are we doing if a student is struggling in reading, and Heather and Paul do a great job of this, what instruction are we going to give them to help them improve X, Y, and Z reading skills? Not just hoping for the best. So that's the biggest challenge we have. And there's other challenges too, but those are, say, when I talk about education, I usually talk about two key points. One, we have to have high expectations for all. And then two, we need to get students to think and think thoughtfully. Everything we do at schools falls underneath one of those two umbrellas. I believe that forever. Whether we teach history or PE or math, get students to think. That's just the thing John Kenny talks about, is getting kids to think and encouraging higher levels of thinking, and not just teaching to the masses. So that I would say is number one challenge. Would you agree with that? There's more, obviously, but that's the most important one.
I just want to say, when I went to school at St. Mary's years ago, there was always a minimum between 58 and 62 kids in a class. And in that classroom, sometimes there was students that were teaching third grade and fourth grade all at the same time. And I remember my mother always said that when she was in school, there was a special name for the slow students, and I cannot remember what it was.
Was it what?
A name for the slow students,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I can't remember what it was.
Probably some that we're not using now.
Yeah.
No, you would not use that word now.
Yeah. Just like the word John Kenny, like I said, we'll be fired if we use the word now.
I won't start calling people laggards.
Laggards and dollar backwards, but I'm saying it in context, I think they're horrible term myself personally. But back in those days, that was accepted. The laggards and dollar. Blockheads, Charlie Brown, blockhead,
I thought Charlie Brown was
yeah, blockheads, so. I enjoyed this more than I thought it would, quite honestly. It was challenging at first. I thought, how am I going to read this book from the 1920s? But it was he was really, a remarkable man. Oh, sorry.
He was also a big supporter for the Holland
He was.
Historical Society.
He was.
And keeping that momentum and making sure that our history and our artifacts are on display and educating people. So he was a real force to
Yeah.
deal with at that time.
He also worked hard to make sure that the legacy of Robert Morris was also preserved. He wrote about it to Robert Morris, so he was very important in that concept too. Yeah.
What's the average classroom students now like at John Kennedy?
High teens, low 20s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
average would be probably 20.
21.
Yeah. What's interesting too is that a lot of the pieces that John Kennedy talks about, having two teachers in the same room, we do that now. We will have like a regular ed teacher, say I'm the third grade teacher, and then I may have 3 or 4 special education students in there. Paul might be the teacher with me, and his job is to first help all the students, but his primary job is to focus on those students who have special needs, who have learning needs. So the goal is to get kids in what we call mainstream in all the classes. And we had 2 teachers in the class, we see them all the time. Even when I taught in the 90s, I had another teacher in the room with me. She helped, those students that had, special learning needs. So it's what he talked about in many schools, all schools do it now. It's the phrase we use now is called the consultant teacher. They consult with the teacher, they consult with the special ed office, and making sure that those students' needs are met as well. So they're not like pushed aside in a special classroom. That's the last thing we want to do with kids. Sometimes you have to, and it's fine, but we want to keep kids the concept of high expectations. So.
When I went to school, they were building John Kennedy, because I went to Washington School.
Sure, yeah.
Which was now the administration building, but it was a big deal back then to be able to still stay in the school because we were so overcrowded. They had like an annex in the back, and that's where a lot of the kids went, and then they'd have to have a time break to use the restroom and everything, and we'd go back into the school and get our lunch and then go back into the annex. So that was a big deal when they built John Kennedy for this area.
I found some of the artifacts, I tell Ryan, in the storage room at Robert Morris, was all kinds of artifacts when the school was built, like I said, in 1956. Zeta Muller was a principal, and there were some names in it even there that I recognize, some old Batavia names that were involved on the Board of Education. And even then, parents were fighting, back then to keep their schools. There's already, now we see it all the time, schools want to merge. They usually don't happen because people have so much pride in their own towns and they don't want to merge. But here, the big deal, and we saw it back in 2011, the concept of neighborhood schools. Even back then, in the 50s, parents were fighting for the neighborhood schools. That concept is now, I think, thankfully aside for the better. But back then, parents wanted to fight for the neighborhood schools.
Well, it was a big deal when John Kennedy was built compared to going to Washington School. I mean, it was a nice school and everything, and of course the park was right across the street, Austin Park, so that made it nice when they would take us out, even on your lunch, that you could bring your lunch and go eat in the park and stuff.
Yeah.
But that was a really big deal to have a one-story school system and everything.
So there was a school here long before my time, maybe some of you can recall, on School Street, which where Molasses is, right? So there's a school, it's no longer there, but there's a school also on School Street. I'm not sure which one it was. But,
that was just called that was, I think, school number 2 of the Union-Free School
The
District,
Union-Free
as it
School
was called
District,
at that time. But yeah, that ceased to be a school still in the 19th century. Because Baker Gun Company actually moved into the old school building as part of their factory.
Oh.
So, the name still stuck around, but there had been a school there for, well now, 125 years basically. So.
How are the Batavia kids doing on their regents?
We're doing well. Paul was a former high school principal, and we saw one of our concerns this past year, quite honestly, was how our students are doing in geometry, which is a very challenging course. It's challenging even for me. My daughter had a hard time with it. My nephew's having a hard time with it. We saw some good improvements in our geometry, so we worked hard at that as a district. Paul, I'll give Paul some credit for that as well. He worked hard on that to make sure that our geometry scores improved. I don't have the stats in my head right now, but I know geometry was a concern. We did see some improvements there. And we were competitive with our peers in our region as well. Council examples, anything that really stand out?
No, I would agree with you. It definitely, the challenge of the pandemic and, students being remote for almost a year and a half, there was learning loss there, and recovering that, and, just even the consistency of being back in the classroom and study habits and such. So, we're pleased to see some growth. We especially focused on algebra and geometry this year because we needed to see that, and so I think we made a good step forward, and then this coming year I think we're going to take another step forward.
So right now there's 5 exams kids need to pass to get ahead. They have to take U.S. history, global history, 1 math, an English, and a science. Right? Those are the 5. Yeah.
Those are the required ones, yes.
So those are, then they can choose, usually they pick earth science or biology, now it's called living environment. So they have to take the sciences, the history, the ELA, and math. And honestly, the one that kids find the most challenging has been geometry. Forever, it's a hard course.
Do teachers find it difficult because they have to teach to the test? Basically, do they feel like all of their time is taken up teaching to the test, like making sure the kids can pass the pre-Ks?
So,
do they have time to teach them the critical thinking skills
so I think
we need?
I'm going to answer that a couple different ways. Teaching to the test, I would say, is no longer a thing anymore. We try to really avoid that. But here's the but. If the test itself is a valid test and it has good content on there, if we're doing our jobs all along, we don't need to teach to the test. If the test is, if what we teach is aligned to the state standards and the state assessment, then it should happen naturally. I'll give you an example. When I taught, I taught U.S. history. I taught 11th grade U.S. history. I'd like to think I've been told I was a good teacher. I'd like to think, I'd like to think that I was, but I never reviewed. I taught till the day of the test. I taught new stuff till the day of the test. And my concept was, if I've done my job, teachers do their job, then if we review, we're just going back and rehashing. If we're doing our job once right the first time as teachers and go back and work with those kids that have had challenges, we shouldn't need to do this, what you call teaching to the test. I never taught to the test, right? I knew it was on the test, and I would have the kids ready for it as the best teacher do. But if the test is valid, if it's aligned, if it's research-based, and what we do as teachers is it should all happen naturally. You want to comment on that?
No, I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. There's not so much stopping instruction before a test and just trying to cram for it because it's embedded and aligned in everything that you do, and it's because the New York State standards are aligned to that and are aligned to the curriculum, so it matches nicely.
When we do have, and I would have like review classes like after school, and that's when I would do all the test prep, but not during the school day. It's almost like, I give an example of music teachers, right? So if a music teacher is doing, I talk to music teachers all the time about the difference between a lesson and a rehearsal. I use it all the time with music teachers. I'm also an amateur musician. The difference between a lesson and a rehearsal. If you're going into like rehearsal mode, right, your goal is to get ready for the concert. Make sure everything sounds, and that's what you do in a rehearsal. In a lesson, what are you doing? You are teaching. So you teach the musical concepts throughout the whole year, and you have lesson or rehearsal. There's not much teaching going on in a rehearsal. You could probably even make a football analogy too, right? There's less teaching going. So the concept of teaching to the test, in my mind, is almost like a rehearsal. I think you want to see less of that. It has to happen at times, but you want to see less of that. Anything else? So I would recommend the book if you can find a copy. It was quite enlightening and eye-opening. I didn't expect it to be I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did. And as I was reading each chapter, I was telling my colleagues in my office, I can't believe you use this term, use the ladder, all these concepts that just makes your skin crawl nowadays. But he was really ahead of his time. So the school, to end with, the school is rightly named after him, not John F. Kennedy. Nothing against John F. Kennedy. He was before my time, fine man, I'm sure, but this school, it definitely deserves to be named after our John Kennedy. So, all right.
Well, thank you again,
Thanks,
Jason,
Ryan.
for that wonderful presentation. Just a couple upcoming things for anybody interested. Our next guest speaker is actually tonight, so we're double dipping today. We have Stephen Tulowicki, who is from SUNY Geneseo's Geology Department, who will be coming to talk about his book, The Atlas of Letchworth State Park, and how it became America's favorite state park. So it's not just about the geology, it's also about the tourism aspect and the history behind the park. So that's tonight at 7 o'clock. Our next Job with Joe in September, Bernita Scoings and Charlie Boyd will be talking about John C. Gardner, our famous author from Batavia. As out at the Batavia Town Historian's Office, they have a lot of the artifacts from John C. Gardner's life, so they'll also bring a few of those just to check out. And then we've got several other programs in September. September is packed. We've got Derek Maxfield on September, I'm blanking on it now. It's the first week in September. We'll talk about Victorian deathways, particularly antebellum United States concepts of death and mourning, to go along with our cemetery exhibit. We also have Stephen Van Remmen, took a while, but Joseph Van Remmen, I'll get his name right eventually, who is talking about how Buffalo got its name. As he has a theory, but I'll call it more than a theory, but it's not so widely accepted, but where the name Buffalo comes from. He's a sort of a researcher from the Buffalo area that's really gotten into this aspect, so that's very interesting. And trivia in September is on the Mayflower. So be sure to check all that out. Everything's on our website, our Facebook page. For those of you who are members, you'll get my email today with all of that information, so you can double check my information in case I missed anything. And if you're not a member, wink wink, you can always sign up anytime. It's a very inexpensive way to support us, and it allows us to do a lot of these programmings like Java with Joe. So if you are interested in that, just see me in the gift shop and I can give you a form. But other than that, thank you guys for coming and hope to see you another time.